David pressed his sweaty palms against his uniform as the transport shuttle approached the enormous alien structure floating in space. Through the small window, he could see the meeting hall where Earth would either join the galactic community or be turned away forever. This was humanity's first chance to prove they belonged among the stars. The shuttle docked with a soft thud, and David stepped out with his small team. The air inside the alien station felt different, charged with energy he could not understand. Strange lights pulsed along the walls in patterns that hurt his eyes if he looked too long. Other humans from Earth's delegation were already waiting in the main corridor, all looking as nervous as David felt. Ambassador Williams, the lead diplomat, nodded to David as he approached. "Ready for this?" Williams asked quietly. "The aliens have been waiting for 3 hours. They seem impatient." David adjusted the small carrier bag on his shoulder. Inside, Whiskers the orange cat was sleeping peacefully, completely unaware that the fate of humanity might depend on this meeting. "As ready as we'll ever be," David replied. They walked through sliding doors into a vast circular chamber. David's breath caught in his throat. 3 groups of aliens sat around the room, each so different from humans that his mind struggled to process what he was seeing. The first group looked like living crystals. Their bodies were tall and sharp, made of what appeared to be clear glass that changed colors as they moved. When they spoke, their voices sounded like wind chimes in a storm. These were the Ashanti, and their leader was called Prime Crystal Lumen. The second group was even stranger. They looked like giant insects walking upright, with multiple arms and large black eyes that never seemed to blink. They moved in perfect coordination, as if controlled by one mind. David had read that they were called the Collective, and they shared thoughts across their entire species. The third group reminded David of the frogs he used to catch as a child. But these were 7 feet tall and wore elaborate clothing, made from materials that seemed to shift and flow like water. These were the Aquarians, and they breathed through gills on their necks as well as their mouths. "Welcome, humans," Prime Crystal Lumen spoke first, her crystal body flashing bright blue. "We have reviewed your application to join our Galactic Alliance. Your technology shows promise, though it is primitive compared to ours." Ambassador Williams stepped forward. "Thank you for this opportunity. We believe humanity can contribute much to the galactic community." One of the insect-like collective members made a clicking sound. "Your mathematics are acceptable. Your engineering shows creativity. However, we must understand your culture before we can approve your membership." David felt his heart racing. This was the moment they had prepared for. Williams gestured to the human team. "We would be honored to share our culture with you. We have brought examples of human art, music, and our most cherished relationships." "Relationships?" asked the Aquarian representative, water dripping from his gills as he spoke. "You mean your mating practices?" "Not exactly," Williams replied carefully. "We mean the bonds we form with other species on our planet. Our companion animals." David stepped forward and gently opened his carrier bag. Whiskers poked his orange head out, blinking sleepily at the strange surroundings. Several humans in the delegation also brought out their animal companions. Dr. Rachel Kim held a small border collie named Scout, while Captain Sam Rodriguez had a honey badger called Bruno in a specially designed container. The reaction was immediate and shocking. Prime Crystal, Lumen's body flashed bright red as she made a sound like breaking glass. The collective members began clicking rapidly among themselves, their compound eyes focusing on the animals with what David could only describe as disgust. The Aquarian representative's gills flapped rapidly as he made wet gasping sounds. "You brought pets?" Prime Crystal Lumen asked, her voice dripping with disbelief. "We prefer to call them companions," David said quickly. "These animals are our partners. They help us, comfort us, and share our lives." The aliens looked at each other, and then something terrible happened. They began to laugh. The Ashanti's laughter sounded like crystal wind chimes crashing to the ground. The collective made rapid clicking sounds that David realized was their version of laughter. The Aquarians made wet croaking noises that echoed through the chamber. "Partners," the collective speaker managed between clicks. "You keep lower life forms as emotional support? This explains much about your primitive development," Prime Crystal Lumen said, her crystal body now pulsing with what David assumed was amusement. "Advanced species do not waste resources on creatures that serve no practical purpose." The Aquarian representative shook his large head. On our world, we use animals for food, transportation, or labor. To keep them for feelings is biological inefficiency of the highest order. David felt his face burning with embarrassment and anger. Around him, the other humans looked shocked and hurt. Whiskers, sensing the tension, began to purr softly and rubbed against David's chest. "You don't understand," David said, trying to keep his voice steady. "These relationships make us stronger, not weaker. They teach us cooperation, loyalty, and empathy." "Empathy?" The collective speaker clicked dismissively. "Emotion is the enemy of logical thinking. We had hoped humans might be rational enough for galactic citizenship, but this display proves otherwise." Prime Crystal Lumen stood, her crystal body now glowing with cold white light. "The Galactic Council cannot accept a species that wastes energy on emotional attachments to inferior creatures. It suggests a fundamental weakness in your character." Ambassador Williams stepped forward desperately. "Please let us explain further. These relationships are not weakness, they are strength." "Strength?" The Aquarian laughed, a wet sound that made David's stomach turn. "Show us this strength. Prove to us that your emotional attachments are anything more than primitive sentimentality." The chamber fell silent, except for Whisker's gentle purring. David looked around at his fellow humans, seeing the same determination in their eyes that he felt in his heart. "Fine," David said quietly. "We'll prove it." "Excellent," Prime Crystal Lumen replied, her body flashing with cold amusement. "We will design a series of tests, practical challenges that will demonstrate whether your companion creatures provide any actual advantage. When you fail, perhaps you will understand why emotional thinking has no place among the stars." The aliens began discussing the details among themselves, their voices mixing into a cacophony of chimes, clicks, and croaks. David gently petted Whiskers, feeling the cat's warm fur against his fingers. "We won't let them down," he whispered to his orange companion. "We'll show them what real partnership looks like." But as he looked around at the alien faces filled with condescension and certainty, David wondered if they had just made a terrible mistake. The future of humanity now depended on proving that love and loyalty were not weaknesses, but the greatest strengths their species possessed. The arguing had been going on for 2 hours. David sat in the small human quarters aboard the alien station, listening to Ambassador Williams and the other diplomats debate their next move. Through the wall, he could hear the aliens in their own meeting chambers, making their strange sounds as they planned the challenges. "We should have brought the military units," Captain Sam Rodriguez said for the 10th time. He sat cross-legged on the floor with Bruno the honey badger resting against his leg. "These aliens don't understand anything except force." "That's exactly the kind of thinking that got us into this mess," Dr. Rachel Kim replied. She was gently brushing Scout the border collie, who seemed to be the only one in the room completely relaxed. "They already think we're primitive. Showing aggression will only prove their point." David stood up and walked to the small window. Outside, he could see Earth hanging in the distance, a blue marble against the black of space. Millions of people down there were counting on them to succeed, and they didn't even know it yet. Whiskers jumped onto the windowsill beside him and began washing his paw with deliberate calm. The simple act somehow made David feel better. There was something about cats that always made everything seem manageable, even when the entire future of humanity was at stake. A soft chime filled the room, and the wall screen activated. Prime Crystal Lumen's sharp features appeared, her crystal body glowing with cool blue light. "Humans," she said without any greeting, "we have decided on the parameters of your test. You will have 3 opportunities to prove that your emotional attachments provide practical advantages over logical thinking and advanced technology." Ambassador Williams stepped in front of the screen. "We accept these terms. What are the challenges?" The crystal alien's form shifted to green. "The first test will be survival and navigation in a hostile environment. The second will be problem-solving under pressure. The third will be crisis management and resource allocation." "Sounds fair," Williams replied carefully. "You misunderstand," Prime Crystal Lumen continued. "These are not separate tests. They are one continuous challenge on the abandoned mining colony of Kepler 438c. You will have 72 hours to complete all objectives while surviving the planet's dangers." David felt his stomach drop. He had read about Kepler 438c in the mission briefings. The planet had been abandoned after the mining equipment started malfunctioning, and dangerous creatures began emerging from the deep tunnels. No one had been back there in 5 years. What exactly are the objectives? Dr. Kim asked. You must navigate to the central mining facility, restore power to the main computer systems, and establish communication with this station. You must do this while avoiding or neutralizing the hostile wildlife that now inhabits the colony. Captain Rodriguez stood up straighter. What equipment will we be allowed to bring? Standard survival gear only. No advanced weapons, no artificial intelligence assistance, no robotic helpers. If your companion animals are truly advantageous, this should be sufficient. The collective speaker's voice joined the conversation, sounding like metal scraping on metal. Our teams will have the same restrictions, though we will rely on our natural abilities and basic technology rather than pets. They're not pets, David said firmly. They're partners. We shall see, Prime Crystal Lumen replied. The transport to Kepler 438c departs in 6 hours. I suggest you prepare. The screen went dark, leaving the humans alone with their thoughts and fears. This is insane, Ambassador Williams muttered. They're asking us to risk our lives to prove a point about cats and dogs. Not cats and dogs, Captain Rodriguez corrected. Partners. And we're not just risking our lives. We're risking the future of every person on Earth. David picked up Whiskers and felt the cat's motor-like purring against his chest. Maybe that's exactly why we can win this, he said quietly. They see our animals as burdens, as weaknesses that slow us down. But they're wrong. Dr. Kim nodded slowly. David's right. Every species on Earth that survived did so through cooperation. Wolves became dogs by working with humans. Cats chose to live with us because it benefited both species. These relationships aren't accidents. The aliens don't understand, Captain Rodriguez added, scratching behind Bruno's ears. They think partnership means one species controlling another. But real partnership means both sides become stronger. Engineer Luke Thompson, who had been quiet until now, finally spoke up. I've been thinking about their technology. It's impressive, but it's all based on dominance. The Ashanti control their crystal formations. The collective controls their drones. The Aquarians control their biotechnology, so? Williams asked. So what happens when their control fails? When their technology breaks down or their commands don't work? Luke smiled and petted Scout's head. We don't control our animals. We cooperate with them. That means they can think independently, solve problems we can't see, and make decisions based on their own abilities. David felt a spark of hope growing in his chest. That's it. That's our advantage. They're bringing tools to solve problems. We're bringing thinking, feeling partners who can adapt to anything. The next few hours passed quickly. The humans gathered their basic survival equipment, water purifiers, medical supplies, simple tools, and emergency rations. They also packed special gear for their animal companions, protective vests, water containers, and high-energy food. As they prepared to board the transport, David overheard the aliens making their own preparations. The Ashanti were loading crystal scanning devices and precision tools. The collective had combat drones and analytical equipment. The Aquarians brought biotechnology that could adapt to different environments. Look at all that gear, Captain Rodriguez whispered. Maybe we're being stupid. Maybe we should have brought more technology. No, Dr. Kim replied firmly. Technology can be broken, hacked, or malfunction. Trust can't. Loyalty can't. Love can't. As they walked onto the transport ship, David noticed the aliens watching them with expressions he was beginning to recognize as amusement and pity. The collective speaker made clicking sounds to his companions. Prime Crystal Lumen's body flashed in patterns that David was learning meant disdain. But David also noticed something else. The aliens were watching their animal companions with fascination they tried to hide. When Whiskers stretched and yawned, several Ashanti crystals flickered with what might have been curiosity. When Bruno waddled confidently alongside Captain Rodriguez, the collective drones seemed to analyze his every movement. When Scout looked directly at the Aquarian representative and wagged his tail once, the alien's gills fluttered in what David hoped was surprise. The transport ship was larger inside than David had expected, with separate sections for each team. As they settled in for the journey to Kepler 438c, David found himself thinking about the challenge ahead. Scared? Dr. Kim asked, settling into the seat beside him with Scout on her lap. Terrified, David admitted, but also excited. This is our chance to show the galaxy what humanity really is. And what are we exactly? she asked with a smile. David looked around at his team. Captain Rodriguez was sharing his rations with Bruno, even though they both had plenty. Luke was teaching Scout a new hand signal, building their communication. Dr. Kim was checking Whisker's health for the third time, making sure he was comfortable for the journey ahead. We're a species that learned the most important lesson in the universe. David said finally, we're stronger together than apart. Not just humans with humans, but humans with anyone willing to be our partner. As the transport ship jumped to faster than light speed, carrying them toward their destiny on a dangerous alien world, David felt Whisker settle into his lap with a contented purr. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. Kepler 438c looked like a wounded planet from orbit. Brown scars marked where the mining operations had torn into the surface, and strange green clouds drifted through the atmosphere. David pressed his face against the transport window as they descended, trying to get a better look at their destination. The landing was rough. The transport's engines coughed and wheezed as they touched down on the cracked landing pad near the abandoned mining colony. Through the dust and smoke, David could see the massive industrial complex that would be their target, a cluster of dark buildings connected by overhead bridges, all leading to a central tower that stretched toward the cloudy sky. Environmental readings are interesting, Dr. Kim announced, checking her scanner. The air is breathable, but there are high levels of unknown chemical compounds. Temperature is 42 degrees Celsius, humidity is 90%, and there are electromagnetic disturbances throughout the area. Prime Crystal Lumen's voice crackled through the comm system. Each team will begin from a different landing zone. The humans will start from the southern approach, through the underground tunnel system, navigate to the central facility, restore power and establish communication. Your time begins now. David adjusted his pack and checked Whisker's special harness one more time. The cat looked alert and curious, his ears rotating as he listened to the strange sounds of the alien world. Around them, the rest of the human team made their final preparations. Stay close, Captain Rodriguez warned, checking Bruno's protective vest. According to the old mining reports, these tunnels are full of creatures that weren't here when the colony was active. Something changed after the humans left. They approached the tunnel entrance together. It was a gaping hole in the ground about 10 feet wide, with rusted metal stairs leading down into darkness. The air that rose from the depths smelled sour and wrong, like rotting fruit mixed with machine oil. Luke activated a small flashlight and started down first, with Scout at his heels. The border collie moved carefully, testing each step before putting his full weight on it. David followed with Whiskers, then Dr. Kim, and finally Captain Rodriguez with Bruno bringing up the rear. The tunnel was worse than David had imagined. Water dripped constantly from the ceiling, and strange growths covered the walls like alien moss. The electromagnetic disturbances Dr. Kim had mentioned were stronger down here. Their electronic equipment crackled and buzzed with interference. Compass is spinning, Luke announced quietly. GPS is dead. We're navigating by instinct now. They had been walking for 20 minutes when Whiskers suddenly stopped. The cat pressed himself low against David's chest and began making a low rumbling sound that wasn't quite a purr. His ears were flat against his head, and his tail was twitching in short, sharp movements. Something's wrong, David whispered. Dr. Kim checked her scanner, but the electromagnetic interference made it useless. I can't get any readings. What is it? Before David could answer, Whiskers jumped down from his arms and padded silently to the left wall of the tunnel. He sniffed carefully at what looked like solid rock, then sat down and looked back at David with an expression that clearly said this way. He wants us to go through the wall, David said, feeling slightly foolish. Through solid rock? Captain Rodriguez asked skeptically. But Luke was already examining the wall where Whiskers sat. Wait, this isn't rock. It's some kind of artificial barrier. The texture is different, and there's a draft coming from behind it. Working together, they managed to find hidden catches and remove what turned out to be a camouflaged maintenance panel. Behind it was a narrow service tunnel that led in the direction they needed to go. How did he know? Dr. Kim wondered aloud. Cats can sense air pressure changes, David explained as they squeezed through the opening. He felt the draft from the other side and knew there was space back there. The service tunnel was cramped but safer than the main passage. They could hear strange scratching and clicking sounds from the larger tunnel they had left behind, sounds that definitely didn't come from any Earth animal. They had been crawling for 10 minutes when Scout suddenly stopped and whined softly. Luke immediately halted, and the rest of the team bunched up behind him. "What is it, boy?" Luke whispered. Scout backed up carefully and pressed against Luke's leg. His ears were pricked forward, and his nose was working overtime, sniffing the air ahead. "Gas," Dr. Kim said suddenly, checking a small chemical detector that was still working despite the interference. "There's a pocket of toxic gas about 50 meters ahead. The concentration would be lethal." "How did Scout know?" Captain Rodriguez asked. "Dogs have an incredible sense of smell," Luke explained proudly. "He can detect chemical changes at levels our instruments can't measure." They backtracked and found another route, guided by Scout's nose and Whisker's ability to sense air currents. It added an hour to their journey, but they avoided what would have been a deadly trap. Meanwhile, they could hear the other teams struggling through the main tunnels. The collective's communications buzzed with frustrated clicking as their drones malfunctioned in the electromagnetic field. The Ashanti team's crystal technology was sending confused light signals, unable to penetrate the strange mineral composition of the tunnel walls. "Their equipment isn't working," Dr. Kim observed with satisfaction. "But ours is," Captain Rodriguez pointed out. David scratched Whiskers behind the ears. "Our equipment doesn't need to work perfectly. We have backup systems that have been tested for millions of years." They reached another obstacle an hour later, a flooded section of tunnel where acidic water had eaten through the floor, creating a pool that blocked their path. The water glowed with an unhealthy green light, and small bubbles rose constantly from its depths. "Chemical analysis shows extreme acidity," Dr. Kim reported. "This would dissolve our protective gear in minutes." Luke was already examining the walls, looking for another way around, when Bruno surprised everyone. The honey badger had been quiet for most of the journey, riding in his carrier on Captain Rodriguez's back. But now he was making urgent chittering sounds and pawing at the carrier's door. "He wants out," Captain Rodriguez said uncertainly. "Let him," David suggested. "He's trying to tell us something." Bruno scrambled out of the carrier and immediately waddled to the edge of the acidic pool. But instead of trying to enter the water, he began digging at the wall beside it. His powerful claws scraped away loose rock and debris, revealing a narrow ledge that ran along the pool's edge just above the waterline. "Badgers are natural diggers," Captain Rodriguez said with growing admiration. He found a path we never would have seen. The ledge was narrow and slippery, but it was wide enough for humans to edge along carefully. Bruno went first, his low center of gravity and fearless nature making the crossing look easy. The humans followed one by one, pressing themselves against the wall as acidic water lapped just inches below their feet. They had been underground for 3 hours when they finally reached the central facility's lower levels. Behind them, they could hear the other team still struggling with the main tunnel system. The collective had lost 2 drones to the toxic gas they had missed. The Ashanti were reporting that their crystal scanners were singing discord, apparently their version of total malfunction. "We're ahead," Luke announced with amazement. "We're actually ahead of teams with advanced technology." "Because we don't need advanced technology," David replied, settling Whiskers back into his harness. "We have something better." As they climbed the service stairs toward the main facility, David could hear the sounds of the other teams finally reaching the lower levels. Their alien voices echoed through the tunnels, frustrated clicking from the collective, discordant chimes from the Ashanti, and wet croaking sounds from the Aquarians. But the human team moved forward confidently, guided by senses honed over millions of years of evolution and partnership. Whisker's ears twitched as he monitored the building's air currents. Scout's nose tested each new area for chemical dangers. Bruno's fearless confidence kept the team moving when uncertainty might have slowed them down. "You know what I think?" Dr. Kim said as they approached the main facility's entrance. "I think we've been looking at this wrong. The aliens think we brought pets to help us with their challenges, but really, we brought partners who have been helping us survive for thousands of years." David smiled and felt Whiskers purr against his chest. They have no idea what they're up against. As they reached the facility's main doors, emergency lighting flickered in the corridors beyond. Somewhere in the building's depths, ancient machinery hummed with power waiting to be restored. The real test was just beginning, but David felt more confident than he had since this whole adventure started. The aliens might have advanced technology and superior intellects, but humanity had something that couldn't be programmed or manufactured: trust that had been earned over generations, loyalty that went both ways, and the kind of partnership that made both species stronger together than either could be alone. The mining facility's main computer core was a cathedral of twisted metal and sparking wires. David stood in the doorway, overwhelmed by the scale of destruction inside. Massive support beams had collapsed, creating a maze of steel and concrete. Emergency lights cast eerie shadows through the smoke that still rose from damaged equipment. "This is going to be more complicated than we thought," Dr. Kim said, consulting her scanner. "The main power conduits are buried under at least 20 tons of debris. Even if we could move it all, the radiation levels in that area would kill us in minutes." Luke was already examining the computer terminals that lined the walls. Most were dark, but a few still showed flickering displays. "The backup systems are still functional, but they're running on emergency power. We need to reach the primary core to restore full functionality." Captain Rodriguez studied the wreckage with a tactical eye. There might be maintenance tunnels that weren't damaged. The original builders would have included backup access routes. They had been working for 30 minutes when the ground began to shake. It started as a gentle vibration, like a large machine starting up somewhere deep below. But within seconds it became a violent tremor that sent loose debris raining from the ceiling. David grabbed onto a support beam as the entire building swayed around them. "Earthquake!" Dr. Kim shouted over the rumbling noise. The shaking lasted for almost a minute. When it finally stopped, David looked around and felt his heart sink. The entrance they had used was now completely blocked by fallen concrete slabs. The emergency stairs had collapsed. Even worse, the structural damage had created new weak points throughout the building. "We're trapped," Luke said quietly. Before anyone could respond, alien voices echoed through the building's communication system. The collective's mechanical clicking was rapid and distressed. Prime Crystal Lumen's chiming voice carried notes of genuine alarm. The Aquarian's wet croaking sounds were definitely panic. "It appears all teams are now trapped inside the facility," Dr. Kim translated from her universal communication device. "The Ashanti team is buried in the eastern wing. The collective's drones are malfunctioning from structural damage. The Aquarians are caught in a flooded section where the water treatment systems ruptured." David felt Whiskers tense in his arms. The cat's ears were rotating constantly, and his eyes were wide as he listened to sounds the humans couldn't hear. Suddenly, Whiskers jumped down and began pawing at David's leg, making urgent meowing sounds. "He's trying to tell us something," David said. Before anyone could guess what the cat meant, another earthquake struck. This one was stronger than the first, and it lasted longer. The building groaned and twisted around them like a living thing in pain. When the shaking stopped, they could hear new sounds. The hiss of escaping gas, the crackle of electrical fires, and most frightening of all, the slow creaking of metal under stress. "The building is going to collapse," Captain Rodriguez said grimly. "We need to get out of here now." "But the mission," Luke protested. "We need to restore the computer systems." "Not if we're dead," Dr. Kim replied. "We need to find a way out and worry about the mission later." That was when Bruno surprised everyone. The honey badger had been unusually quiet since they entered the building, staying close to Captain Rodriguez and watching everything with his bright black eyes. But now he suddenly scrambled out of his carrier and began digging at a pile of debris near the far wall. "Bruno, no," Captain Rodriguez called. "Get away from there!" But Bruno ignored him completely. The badger dug with incredible determination, his powerful claws scraping away concrete chunks and twisted metal. Within minutes, he had opened a gap just large enough for a person to crawl through. "There's a space behind the wall," Dr. Kim said, shining her flashlight into the hole. "It looks like a service corridor." Scout immediately ran to the opening and began sniffing carefully. His tail wagged once, which Luke had learned meant safe to proceed. "Good boy, Bruno," Captain Rodriguez said with amazement. "How did you know?" David was beginning to understand. He could hear something we couldn't. Maybe voices or machinery or just the echo of open space. Badgers hunt underground. They know how to find hidden passages. They crawled through Bruno's tunnel into a narrow maintenance corridor. The air was cleaner here, and they could hear the building's structural sounds more clearly. But they could also hear something else, alien voices calling for help. "The Ashanti team is close," Dr. Kim said, listening to her communicator. "They're trapped in a storage room about 50 meters from here." "We should help them," David said immediately. "Are you crazy?" Captain Rodriguez asked. "They've been nothing but hostile since we met them. They think we're primitive idiots. That doesn't matter, Dr. Kim replied firmly. They're in danger, Luke nodded. Besides, if we save them, maybe they'll help us complete the mission. They followed Scout's nose and Whisker's ears through the maze of service corridors. The animals seemed to instinctively understand the building's layout in ways that the humans never could. Scout would stop at each intersection and sniff carefully before choosing a direction. Whiskers would listen at ventilation grates and meow softly when he heard voices on the other side. They found the Ashanti team in a storage room where the ceiling had partially collapsed. Prime Crystal Lumen and two other crystal beings were trapped under a heavy metal beam. Their crystal bodies were flickering weakly and cracks had appeared in their translucent surfaces. Humans, Prime Crystal Lumen said weakly as David's team broke through the debris blocking the door. Why are you here? To help, David said simply. He immediately began examining the metal beam. It was too heavy for humans to lift and the wrong shape for their tools to get proper leverage. Our crystal matrices are failing, one of the other Ashanti whispered. The pressure is disrupting our energy patterns. We cannot maintain structural integrity much longer. Captain Rodriguez studied the situation carefully. We need to dig them out from underneath. If we can create a channel under the beam, they might be able to slide free. That would take hours, Luke protested. We don't have hours. That was when Bruno proved what honey badgers were really capable of. The small animal approached the trapped aliens without fear, even though their crystal bodies were sparking and flashing with uncontrolled energy. He sniffed at the metal beam, then began digging underneath it with incredible speed and precision. He's creating an escape route, Captain Rodriguez said in amazement. Bruno, you brilliant little guy. The honey badger's claws were perfectly designed for digging through almost any material. He scraped away concrete, pushed aside metal debris, and even chewed through cables that were in the way. Within 20 minutes, he had created a tunnel just wide enough for the crystal beings to crawl through. As the Ashanti escaped their trap, Prime Crystal Lumen's body began to glow more steadily. Her cracks were sealing themselves as her energy patterns stabilized. You saved us, she said, her voice filled with something that might have been wonder. Your small creature risked itself for beings it had never met. That's what partners do, David replied, scratching Bruno behind the ears. They help. Before Prime Crystal Lumen could respond, another earthquake shook the building. This time they could hear the sound of major structural collapse in other sections. The collective's distress signals were becoming more urgent, and the Aquarian team had gone completely silent. We need to find the others, Dr. Kim said urgently. Agreed, Prime Crystal Lumen said, her crystal body now pulsing with renewed energy. Our scanning abilities are restored. We can help locate the remaining teams. Working together, they moved through the building much faster than either team could have managed alone. The Ashanti could detect life signs through solid matter, while the human animals could navigate the safest routes through the maze of debris. They found the collective team first. 3 of their insect-like members were trapped in an elevator shaft where their flying drones had malfunctioned and crashed. Scout led them to the right maintenance panel. Bruno dug a rescue tunnel, and Whisker's keen hearing helped them locate the trapped aliens in the twisted wreckage. The Aquarian team was in the worst situation. They were trapped in a flooded section where toxic water was rising rapidly. Their gills could process the poisoned liquid for a while, but not indefinitely. We need to drain that chamber, Dr. Kim said, studying the building schematics. But the pump controls are in the main computer core, which is still buried under debris. Not necessarily, Luke said thoughtfully. If we can restore partial power to the backup systems, we might be able to activate the emergency pumps. That meant going back to the computer core, back to the most dangerous part of the building. As they made their way through the corridors, David realized something important had changed. The aliens were no longer treating them as inferior beings. Prime Crystal Lumen asked Whisker's opinion on air currents. The collective speaker requested Bruno's help with a blocked passage. The Aquarian representative actually thanked Scout for leading them away from a gas leak. Your animals, Prime Crystal Lumen said quietly as they approached the computer core. They are not pets at all, are they? No, David replied. They're family. And as they worked together to save everyone trapped in the collapsing building, David began to think that maybe, just maybe, the aliens were beginning to understand what that really meant. The computer core looked even worse than before. The latest earthquake had brought down more ceiling panels and sparks flew from damaged electrical systems. But now they had help. Prime Crystal Lumen's crystal body cast steady light throughout the chamber, while the collective's remaining functional drones provided technical analysis of the damaged systems. "The main power coupling is still buried," Luke announced, checking his readings. "But if we can clear these secondary conduits, we might be able to reroute enough power to activate the emergency pumps." "How long do the Aquarians have?" David asked. Dr. Kim checked her communicator. "The water level is still rising. Their gills can filter the toxins for maybe another hour, but after that..." She didn't need to finish the sentence. The work was dangerous and exhausting. Every few minutes, another tremor would shake the building, sending more debris raining down from above. The air was thick with dust and chemical vapors that made breathing difficult, but slowly they began to make progress. That was when disaster struck again. A massive aftershock, stronger than any before, sent a huge support beam crashing down directly toward the collective speaker. The insect-like alien froze in terror, his compound eyes reflecting the falling metal. David didn't think. He just moved. He dove forward, tackling the collective speaker, and rolling both of them out of the way just as the beam crashed into the spot where the alien had been standing. The impact sent a shower of sparks and concrete chips across both of them. "Are you hurt?" David asked, helping the alien to his feet. The collective speaker's mandibles clicked rapidly in what David now recognized as extreme agitation. "You saved me, but why? We have shown you nothing but contempt." Before David could answer, Whiskers appeared beside them. The orange cat had apparently followed David's rescue attempt, and now he was rubbing against the collective speaker's leg and purring loudly. "He's trying to comfort you," David explained. "Cats do that when they sense someone is upset or hurt." The alien's compound eyes focused on the small cat with an expression David couldn't read. "This creature shows concern for a being it has never met? A being from a different world, a different species? That's what cats do," David said simply. "It's what all our animals do. They care about others." Across the chamber, something even more remarkable was happening. Bruno had noticed that one of the Ashanti team members was having trouble moving debris. The crystal being's arm had been damaged in the collapse, and she couldn't lift the heavy chunks of concrete that blocked their access to a crucial power coupling. Without being asked, Bruno waddled over and began digging, but this time he wasn't creating a tunnel or escape route. He was methodically moving each piece of debris, carrying chunks of concrete and metal to clear spots where they wouldn't be in the way. The honey badger worked with focused determination, pausing occasionally to check if the crystal being could now reach what she needed. "Extraordinary," Prime Crystal Lumen murmured, watching the small animal work. "He understands the task and adapts his behavior to help, even though there is no direct benefit to himself." "That's what partnership means," Captain Rodriguez said proudly. "Bruno knows we're all working toward the same goal. He helps whoever needs help." Dr. Kim was having her own revelation as she worked with Scout to trace damaged power lines. The Border Collie had an incredible ability to follow complex paths through the tangled wreckage. When Dr. Kim pointed to a cable, Scout would sniff it carefully, then follow its route through the debris, alerting her when he found breaks or connections. "I've been thinking about this all wrong," she said to the Aquarian representative who was helping coordinate the rescue of his teammates. "I've been trying to explain animal intelligence in terms of human intelligence, but that's not what this is about. What do you mean?" the Aquarian asked, his gills fluttering with curiosity. "Scout isn't trying to think like a human. He's thinking like a dog, using abilities that millions of years of evolution gave him, but he's choosing to use those abilities to help us achieve our goals. That's not training or conditioning. That's genuine cooperation." The Aquarian watched Scout work for several minutes before responding. "On my world, we have creatures with similar abilities, but we have always seen them as tools to be used, not partners to be consulted." "Maybe that's the difference," Dr. Kim suggested. "We don't use our animals. We work with them." As the rescue operation continued, David began to notice changes in how the aliens interacted with the human team. Prime Crystal Lumen started asking Whiskers to check air currents before they entered new areas. The collective speaker actually requested Bruno's help with digging operations. The Aquarian representative watched Scout's tracking methods with fascination and began copying some of his techniques. But the most dramatic change came when they finally reached the emergency pump controls. The control panel was located in a narrow crawl space that was partially flooded with acidic water. A human could reach it, but only by lying flat and stretching through a gap barely wider than their shoulders. The water level was rising and chemical burns were almost certain. "I'll do it," Luke volunteered immediately. "No," Captain Rodriguez said firmly. "I should go. I have the most experience with dangerous situations." "Actually," Dr. Kim interrupted, "I think Bruno should do it." Everyone turned to look at her in surprise. "Think about it," she continued. "He's small enough to move through that space easily. His skin is thick enough to resist the acid for a short time. And he's fearless in situations that would terrify most creatures." "But can he operate the controls?" the collective speaker asked. Captain Rodriguez knelt down beside Bruno and pulled out a simple diagram he had sketched of the control panel. "See this, buddy? The red switch needs to go up, then the blue button needs to be pressed 3 times. Bruno studied the diagram with intense concentration, his small black eyes moving from the drawing to Captain Rodriguez's pointing finger. Then he looked toward the crawl space and back to the diagram. "I think he understands," Captain Rodriguez said with amazement. What happened next would be talked about for years afterward. Bruno approached the crawl space with calm determination. He sniffed the acidic water once, testing its chemical composition, then waded in without hesitation. The humans and aliens watched in tense silence as the small badger disappeared into the narrow tunnel. Through the communication system, they could hear him moving through the water, his claws scraping against metal as he climbed toward the control panel. Then came the sounds they were hoping for. The click of a switch being moved, followed by 3 distinct button presses. Immediately, pumps throughout the building roared to life. Water began draining from the flooded sections, and fresh air started circulating through the ventilation systems. Bruno emerged from the crawl space wet and slightly burned, but victorious. Captain Rodriguez immediately began treating his minor injuries, while the honey badger accepted praise from humans and aliens alike. "Incredible," the collective speaker said, his voice filled with something David had never heard from him before: respect. He understood the task, assessed the danger, and chose to act for the benefit of beings he had never met. "That," Prime Crystal Lumen added, her crystal body pulsing with warm light, "is not the behavior of a simple animal or a programmed tool. That is the behavior of a true partner." As they finished restoring power to the main systems and established communication with the orbital station, David realized that something fundamental had changed. The aliens were no longer looking at Whiskers, Bruno, and Scout as cute pets or useful tools. They were looking at them as individuals worthy of respect. "Dr. Kim," the Aquarian representative said as they prepared to leave the damaged facility, "would it be possible for me to learn more about your partnership methods? We have creatures on our world that show similar intelligence, but we have never considered working with them as equals." "I would be honored to teach you," Dr. Kim replied with a smile. As they walked through the corridors toward the exit, David felt Whiskers purr against his chest. The cat was relaxed and content, apparently satisfied with the job well done. Around them, aliens and humans worked together to carry equipment and help injured team members. "You know," Prime Crystal Lumen said to David as they emerged into the alien planet's sunlight, "we came here expecting to prove your species' inferiority. Instead, you have taught us something we never knew we needed to learn." "What's that?" David asked. "That true advancement isn't about controlling others," she replied, her crystal body glowing with warm appreciation. "It's about inspiring them to be their best selves, freely given." As the rescue ships arrived to take them back to the orbital station, David looked around at the mixed group of humans and aliens, all working together with mutual respect. It wasn't the outcome anyone had expected, but it was something much better, the beginning of true understanding. The medical bay aboard the orbital station buzzed with activity, as doctors from 4 different species worked together to treat the injuries from the collapsed mining facility. David sat on an examination table, while a crystal-based medical scanner checked him for radiation exposure. Nearby, Whiskers was getting his own checkup from Dr. Kim, who was carefully cleaning a small cut on his paw. 3 days had passed since their return from Kepler 438c, and everything had changed. The transformation started small. Prime Crystal Lumen had asked if she could observe how Dr. Kim cared for Scout's minor burns. The collective speaker had spent hours watching Captain Rodriguez train with Bruno, asking detailed questions about communication methods. The Aquarian representative had requested permission to study the emotional bond between humans and their animal partners. But it went deeper than scientific curiosity. David had noticed the aliens treating Whiskers, Bruno, and Scout as individuals rather than objects. They asked permission before approaching the animals. They offered treats and showed genuine concern for their comfort. Most remarkably, they had begun referring to them by name rather than as the human pets. "Your medical examination is complete," the Ashanti doctor announced, her crystal body pulsing with satisfied blue light. "No significant radiation damage detected. Your companion also appears to be in excellent health." "Thank you," David said, scooping Whiskers into his arms. The cat immediately began purring and rubbing against his chin. "May I ask you something?" the doctor continued. "That sound your companion makes, the vibrating noise. Our analysis suggests it serves no practical function, yet you seem to find it pleasing." "Purring," David explained with a smile, "and you're wrong about it having no function. It's one of the most practical things in the universe." "I do not understand." David scratched behind Whiskers' ears, and the purring grew louder. "When cats purr, it means they're content and happy, but it also lowers stress levels in humans, reduces blood pressure, and promotes healing. Scientists think the vibration frequency might even help bones heal faster." The crystal doctor's body flickered with surprised colors. "So this emotional response provides measurable physical benefits?" "The best partnerships always do," David replied. Across the medical bay, Captain Rodriguez was having a similar conversation with a collective engineer who had been studying Bruno's problem-solving abilities. "Your partner's behavior in the collapsed facility was unprecedented," the engineer clicked. "He assessed a dangerous situation, developed a solution, and executed it without direct commands from you. Our drones cannot function with such independence." "That's because your drones are programmed," Captain Rodriguez explained. "Bruno thinks for himself. I don't control him, I trust him." "But how do you coordinate your actions without direct control?" Captain Rodriguez smiled and called Bruno over. The honey badger waddled across the room and sat beside his partner, looking up expectantly. "Watch this," Rodriguez said. He pointed to a medical kit across the room and simply said, "Bruno, help." The badger immediately trotted over to the kit, picked it up in his strong jaws, and brought it back to Rodriguez. But then he did something unexpected. He set the kit down and began sniffing around Rodriguez's leg, where he had sustained a small injury during the rescue. "I didn't tell him to check my wound," Rodriguez explained to the amazed alien. "He did that because he cares about my well-being. That's what partnership means when we look out for each other." Meanwhile, Dr. Kim was giving an impromptu lecture to a group of Aquarian scientists about Scout's tracking abilities. "The remarkable thing isn't just that he can follow scent trails," she explained as Scout demonstrated, by finding a hidden treat in the observation lounge. "It's that he chooses to use this ability to help us achieve our goals." "But surely this is simply the result of training?" one of the Aquarians asked. "Partly," Dr. Kim agreed, "but training only works because dogs want to cooperate with us. We couldn't train a creature that didn't choose to be our partner." She knelt down and called Scout over. The border collie immediately came to her side, his tail wagging and his intelligent eyes focused on her face. "Scout could leave any time he wanted," Dr. Kim continued. "He's not caged or chained. He stays with us because he wants to be part of our family. That choice, that's what makes the partnership real." The revelations weren't limited to the aliens. David had been amazed to learn about the changes the experience had inspired an alien. Society. Prime Crystal Lumen had contacted her homeworld to request studies on the planet's native crystal formations that grew in cooperative clusters rather than competitive hierarchies. The collective was experimenting with individual drone consciousness, allowing single units to make independent decisions while remaining part of the larger group. The Aquarians had begun reaching out to the intelligent sea creatures on their world, offering partnership instead of domination. "It's remarkable," Ambassador Williams told David as they walked through the station's observation deck. "In 3 days, we've learned more about interspecies cooperation than most civilizations discover in centuries." Through the massive windows, they could see Earth hanging in space, blue and white and beautiful. Soon they would return home with news that would change everything. Humanity had not only been accepted into the galactic community, they had become teachers. "David," a familiar chiming voice called from behind them. They turned to see Prime Crystal Lumen approaching, her crystal body glowing with warm, welcoming light. Beside her walked the collective speaker and the Aquarian representative. We have reached a decision, Prime Crystal Lumen announced. The Galactic Council wishes to formally invite humanity to join our alliance. That's wonderful news, Ambassador Williams replied. But more than that, the collective speaker added, we wish to learn from you. Your species has discovered something we thought impossible, true partnership between different forms of life. The Aquarian representative's gills fluttered with what David now recognized as excitement. We are prepared to offer humanity full membership with special status as advisors on interspecies cooperation. David felt whiskers shift in his arms, and he looked down to see the cat watching the aliens with alert, intelligent eyes. It struck him that Whiskers had no idea he was making history. To the cat, this was just another day with his human partner, doing what they always did, working together to solve problems and help others. There's something else. Prime Crystal Lumen continued. We would like to invite your animal partners to be recognized as honorary citizens of the galactic community. They have proven themselves to be intelligent beings worthy of respect and protection. David's eyes widened. You want to give cats and dogs citizenship? And honey badgers, the collective speaker added, with what David could swear was amusement. And any other species that demonstrates the capacity for true partnership. Dr. Kim arrived just in time to hear the announcement, with Scout at her heels. Did I hear correctly? You're offering citizenship to our animals? They have earned it, Prime Crystal Lumen replied simply. They showed courage, intelligence, and selfless concern for others. These are the qualities we value most in any citizen. Captain Rodriguez joined them with Bruno, who was carrying a small toy in his mouth, a gift from the Ashanti medical team. So what happens now? Rodriguez asked. Now, Ambassador Williams said with a broad smile, we go home and tell Earth that we're not just joining the galactic community, we're helping to rebuild it based on cooperation instead of dominance. They stood together on the observation deck, humans and aliens, cats and badgers and dogs all sharing the same space with mutual respect. David realized that this was just the beginning. The prejudices and assumptions that had divided species for millennia were starting to crumble. You know, he said, scratching Whiskers behind the ears. I think our little guy here started something that's going to change the entire galaxy. Whiskers purred loudly, apparently pleased with the praise, and settled more comfortably in David's arms. Around them, beings from 4 different worlds worked together, planning a future based not on the conquest of others, but on the radical idea that everyone, no matter how different, had something valuable to contribute. The stars outside seemed brighter somehow, as if the universe itself was celebrating this new understanding. And in the gentle rumble of a cat's purr and the loyal presence of a dog at his master's side, David could hear the sound of a better tomorrow beginning. As they prepared to return to Earth with their incredible news, David thought about all the pets waiting at home, cats curled up in sunny windows, dogs playing in backyards, and countless other animals living in partnership with humans who loved them. They had no idea that they were about to become the teachers of an entire galaxy. But then again, they had always been teachers. Humans had just finally learned how to listen.